Good morning. My name is Judd Devermont. I am the director of the Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Africa Matters to U.S. Cities, U.S. Diplomacy under President Biden. This event was made possible through the generous support of the Open Society Foundations. So it's just about a year when CSIS Africa traveled from Washington, D.C. to St. Louis for the Olin Africa Business Forum at the Washington University in St. Louis. We had a debate there, and I wrote an op-ed for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And as we were there and working on these projects, it struck me that our general argument about why Africa matters to the United States is disconnected from what truly resonates for most Americans. The pitch, if you want to call it that, is generally bad news. Terrorism, migration, infectious diseases, humanitarian crises. Now, to be sure, there is some variation. We do talk about trade and investment. We do talk about a growing youth population. We do talk about soft power and Black Panther and Wakanda. But for the most part, the beltway argument really doesn't play. It doesn't convince, and it shows. According to the USC Norman Lear Center, the Norman Lear Center study, stories about Africa appear infrequently on US television. There's a mention about every 5 hours of TV programming. Moreover, viewers are more likely to see negative depictions of Africa than positive ones. US trade with sub-Saharan Africa remains low. It's about 2% of all trade between the United States and the world. And according to a survey by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, in January 2020, only 1% of Americans regarded Africa as the most important region for national security. And that's down from 2%, which was in March 2018. So what we believe is we need a hometown argument about Africa's importance. We believe this is much more relevant and impactful if we focus on cities and communities and their vibrant links to the continent. As part of our research agenda, we wanted to showcase how Africa and Africans contribute to local industries, foster political leadership, enrich cultural life, advance academic scholarship, and promote faith and philanthropic endeavors. And that's exactly what we've been doing. I gave virtual talks to groups in Birmingham, in Des Moines, Louisville, Wichita, St. Louis. Next month, I will be talking in Albuquerque. I'll also be talking in Boise. And we researched the ties between the region and 15 US cities: Albuquerque, Atlanta, Birmingham, Boise, Columbus, Dallas, Denver, Detroit, Durham, Minneapolis, Providence, Salt Lake City, Seattle, St. Louis, and Wichita. Now, these cities were randomly picked. We did want to make sure we had some geographic diversity. We wanted to make sure we had some big cities and some mid-sized cities. We wanted to be in red and blue states, but in general, it was entirely random. And the hypothesis was that we could craft a compelling hometown argument for any major US city in Africa. And I believe that the project we've completed validated that theory. So why don't I show you? We're going to queue up the interactive. So we bend each of these cities into 5 categories. What is the key theme that dominates those ties? Cultural, political, national security, economic, academic, and then religious and philanthropic. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of the interactive. I hope you'll spend more time with it at your leisure. But one of the cities that we looked at first that we thought was an exemplar of cultural ties, and you're going to hear from our Jeffrey on the panel very soon, is St. Louis. There's been prominent museum exhibits there and film festivals featuring Africa's dynamic art scene. St. Louis and St. Louis, Senegal, have sister city programs. Another city we looked at was Denver. This is an example of a political and national security tie. We'll later see a video from the representative, Nikita Ricks. Other cities that we think have these kind of relationships are Boise and Albuquerque. Another city that we looked at is Atlanta. This is an example of economic ties, and Nora from Coca-Cola will talk to us later today and share her thoughts. But in addition to Coca-Cola, Atlanta is the headquarters for leading energy and agricultural firms. Other cities that fit in this bin Birmingham, Dallas, Seattle, and Wichita. Providence, Rhode Island exemplifies academic linkages, home to Brown University, the University of Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Institute of Design. These universities have ties with African universities. And finally, Salt Lake City, which is an example of religious connections. Of course, the Church of Latter-day Saints operates 39 missions in sub-Saharan Africa. So today, what we're going to try to do is we're going to deepen our conversation. And this couldn't be a better time to have this conversation. Not only did the Biden-Harris campaign release an agenda for the African diaspora, but Secretary of State Blinken last week said, and I quote, "In everything we do, the first question we have to ask ourselves is this: how is it going to benefit our fellow Americans? How will this policy, this initiative, this outreach answer their needs and their values? How will it make their lives just a little better?" That's the first question we have to ask, and we're going to hold ourselves to that standard every step of the way. So I think today we're really answering the Secretary's challenge. We're going to connect foreign policy to the lives of Americans, and together we're going to try to craft a better argument about how the region benefits U.S. cities and the American public. I'm really just so fortunate to be joined by three people who really understand this dynamic well. Elizabeth Fitzsimmons is the acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at the Bureau of African Affairs. Jeffrey Soignet is the co-founder and chairman of the board of the St. Louis African Chamber of Commerce. And Nora Odeswa is the Senior Director of Social Impact at the Coca-Cola Company. We're going to have a quick conversation, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A from the audiences. This is super easy to do in a virtual setting. All you have to do is go to our event page at csis.org, click on the link and submit your questions, and then we'll be able to answer them. Okay, let's start with some Q&A. I'm going to catch my breath, and we're going to start with some Q&A. Nora, Coca-Cola has 100 bottling plants in Africa and employs more than 70,000 people, making the company one of the largest private employers on the continent. And in Atlanta, this is a big part of the Coca-Cola company's general revenue. In fact, 20% of sales are generated by the continent. So I'd love, Nora, for you to share a little bit about what Coca-Cola does for the continent and then what it means for people in Atlanta.
Thank you, Jed, and thanks very much for that. And what a great way to start what I believe is a critical conversation for us to have in this season. Really delighted to be here amongst other distinguished panelists and really glad to be part of this conversation today. Being an African myself, living and working in Atlanta for the Coca-Cola Company that's headquartered here in Atlanta, as you say, I just quickly recognize the relationship that the Coca-Cola Company has had with the CSIS way back since the 1980s. And I just want to say a big thank you for your continued focus on Africa and also for this afternoon's event. The Coca-Cola Company has had a very strong history. It still does have a strong history in Africa. We've operated on the continent for nearly 100 years, together with our bottling partners. Believe it or not, we first set foot on the continent in 1928 in South Africa. And since then, we've grown to have presence across 54 countries on the continent. And throughout that time, we've built very strong local businesses. We've created shared opportunity in every country in which we operate. And this really has been one of the greatest strengths that we have as a company. And we believe that we will continue to play a very significant role on the continent as a corporate citizen. And to be honest, Africa plays a very important role in Coca-Cola's long-term global growth strategy. And also amongst multinational companies, I would say that Coca-Cola has an almost unrivaled heritage and presence on the continent, and we are highly, highly visible, very visible part of the fabric of daily life throughout the continent and also in the city of Atlanta. We have more than 140 production facilities, and also our business on the continent is centered on what I would call a global approach. We're a global entity, but we operate locally. So we hire locally, we manufacture locally, we distribute locally, and to a large degree, we also source our ingredients locally. we have this strong fundamental belief, and we have an enduring, unshakable belief that Africa has strong potential and it has promise as the next growth engine of the global economy. Like you earlier mentioned, Judd, a growing and rapidly urbanizing population who are brand conscious more than ever. We're talking about a population that's economically active, highly connected, very entrepreneurial, and very innovative. And we believe that this population will drive the dynamic growth that we look towards. Africa is also one of the youngest continents in the world, with over 65% of its population under the age of 35. As the Coca-Cola Company, we're strengthening our system on the continent for long-term growth. We're strengthening our system for investing in infrastructure, investing in our communities, and also investing in talent. Like you said earlier, we are one of the largest leading private sector employers on the continent, having over just about 70,000 system employees. And directly, each of these employees, directly or indirectly, supports an additional 8 to 10 jobs upstream and even downstream. And over the last couple of years, we have made a commitment that we will invest about 17 billion across the continent. And there's various other things that we do on the continent, like I've said, investment in our business and also investment in the communities that we proudly operate in. I'll just talk very quickly about some of the investments that we have made. Personally, I lead a global women's economic empowerment initiative, which we call 5 by 20, which we initiated in 2010, and it's now 2020. And in this particular initiative, we made a bold and audacious commitment that we would enable the economic empowerment of 5 million women entrepreneurs by the end of 2020. And today, I'm excited to say that we have reached that goal. We have enabled the economic empowerment of 5.8 million women. And I'm proud to say that nearly 2 million of these women are from the continent of Africa. We have a very strong water stewardship program, or community water partnership program, which we call Replenish Africa Initiative, which provides clean drinking water and sanitation. And to date, we've done that with over 6 million African people. When we look at this particular year of the pandemic, where basic hand washing is an essential defense against coronavirus, and we look at a continent where over 300 million people are yet to have access to clean drinking water. This is one of our most powerful sustainability initiatives on the continent. We also run what we call Project Last Mile, which is a unique public and private partnership that we as the Coca-Cola Company pioneered together with the foundation, that basically brings a coalition together of governments, of private sector, and civil society. And the thrust of this initiative is really to help strengthen Africa's health systems and improve the availability of vital medication, medicine supplies, what we call last mile. And what we've done very successfully so far is impacted 7 countries across Africa. And we're looking at impacting a number of more countries. Very essential that we work closely with our governments and with other NGOs in this regard. And of course, I will not forget the fact that we have also a very powerful initiative that we call the World Without Waste, which is all about accelerating progress on our long-standing commitment to help solve plastic waste challenges, not only on the continent, but globally around the world. Through the foundation, the Coca-Cola Global Foundation, we have been able to support over 150 community projects in at least 48 of the 54 countries in Africa in the past decade, and managed to disburse grants of nearly $200 million to date. But going into the critical question that you asked, Judd, about when we speak about the impact of this successful business engagement, what does this mean to Atlanta residents? And really a couple of thoughts come to mind. The first thing is that the Coca-Cola Company used to have what we call, quote unquote, an old expatriate business model, which works as follows. You export someone from Atlanta to help develop international markets. But now we have more of an impatriate strategy. Where you have local nationals running our businesses locally And then Atlanta is also importing impatriates, promising leaders, work, getting our leaders to helping our leaders get work here, and then sending them back into the field. And we have several personal examples that we can speak about. We have several proof points, people working here in Atlanta, coming from the continent of Africa, and then over time, going back into their countries to share learnings and to impact the continent. The other thing I would say is that today, roughly 25 to 30% of Coca-Cola employees employed in Atlanta at the headquarters support the company's overall overseas business. 82% of the Coca-Cola business is outside of the UK, and this includes Africa, and this continues to grow. So Coca-Cola's international presence continues to grow, and almost 30% of our employees employed in the HQ or headquarters support the company's overseas business. The other proof point is that just about 10%, I would say, of the company's annual dividends, and this includes dividends derived from profits, domestic or internationally, including Africa. This 10% goes to Atlanta-based recipients. Here I'm looking at individuals, I'm looking at foundations, universities, and also pension plans. In 2020, this particular 10% amounted to roughly about 700 million investments back into the Atlanta community. If I speak quickly about culturally, I would say Atlanta is home to some of the biggest African diasporan communities. I've only been here for just about 16 months, and I've met so many of these diasporan communities coming from all over the continent. We see African people from various countries in the continent, east, south, north, west, all of these Africans who are living, working, and some of them doing very successful businesses in this city. And I would say they're all vibrant additions to the metro Atlanta area. Such cultural roots and embracing diversity, all of these have helped to attract so many headquarters here in Atlanta of Fortune 500 firms. There's a long list of all of these companies that are here operating in Atlanta. I would also say that educational institutions have benefited as well. Here in Atlanta, I see emerging or growing African studies at locally historically Black colleges and universities, whether we speak about Spelman College or Morehouse College or Clark, Atlanta University, and there's several other colleges with significant Africa Studies initiatives, including Georgia State University, if I may say, and a few other universities here in Atlanta. Judd, you earlier even spoke about international trade and Georgia's interaction with Africa. And I was doing a little bit of research and background study and asking myself, I wonder what's the scale of international trade between Georgia and Africa? And I found out that Georgia has exported more than 854 million to Africa in 2020 through the first 11 months of 2020, leave alone the fact that this was a pandemic year. And the top countries are South Africa, what I call the usual suspects of Africa in terms of countries, South Africa, Egypt, as well as Nigeria. And the same applies for the amount of imports. The top 3 African countries that Georgia is importing from: Egypt, South Africa, as well as Kenya. Surprise, surprise, Kenya, $34 million. So I would just say that, yes, while this represents, particularly from an African standpoint, this represents a significant amount of international trade. I would say that we're barely scratching the surface of what I believe is potential for international trade. And we are optimistic. Coca-Cola is very bullish about the potential positive impact of what we now see I'm not sure how many of us know about the African Continent Free Trade Act, the AFCA, which obviously has been joined by all the countries in Africa, and this represents lots of potential for us as a continent, huge potential for intra-trade, huge potential for growing international trade, and removing some of the tariffs and non-tariff barriers even within the continent. When we look at the intra-Africa trade, it's very low, relatively speaking, and we are very confident that the AFTA will begin to support the growth of international trade. So really excited about what's happening on the continent, really excited about what's happening between the city of Atlanta as well as the continent of Africa.
Nora,
Thank you.
that is, I don't know if I could have posed it better. That is a hometown argument about why Africa matters. That was really incredible. It's a couple of things that I just want to react to. First of all, I think Coca-Cola and the story that you're telling, represents how multidimensional this can be, both in terms of enriching a city, employment, and then on the continent side, creating jobs, creating investment opportunities, and then some of the development work that you are doing and how that is creating opportunities for other companies and other businesses. It's really a 360. And as you went through the overall trade of Georgia and the universities, I should say that in our paper, we did categorize these cities by general themes, but no city is just constrained to one. And, in Atlanta, obviously, is where the Center for Disease Control is. So there's a number of things. Each of these cities has a number of key issues that matter to Americans and matter to Africans. I want to turn to Jeffrey because you do a tremendous amount of work in St. Louis for African entrepreneurs. You're the co-founder of the African Chamber of Commerce, as well as Vintendio for Africa. In previous interviews, you've talked about as an immigrant, you want to reach out to Americans and share the values that African immigrants bring to the communities for job creation and new business ideas and cultural sharing, how you break away from these common misconceptions about immigrants. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about what you are doing and how do you talk to fellow residents of St. Louis about the importance of Africa?
Thank you, Jed. Chris, and thank you also for the organizers of this forum. I think it's very hard to follow up after Nora, but I'll say that one, I'm a living example of what Coca-Cola is doing in Africa, because where I worked, actually, I was able to know about Coca-Cola because of I used to work with Coca-Cola, and because of that connection, I was able to know about Green Card, and that's why I'm here. So kudos for Coca-Cola for the good job. I would say that I think that this topic is very important and very important to me in a very special way, because I've been in St. Louis for the last 16 years. And I think when I was here, I could see there was the big need for us to be able to connect with the St. Louis community and also for them to know about the Africa. And I think in the process, that's what I wanted to see, that we can be able to create a brand that we can be able to stand behind and say that this is what we call the brand of Africa. And I think I'm glad when we met last year when you were talking about the African matters in US, and that has always been a bigger challenge. I mean, the biggest drive to be able to sell the idea of African community, not just here in St. Louis, but also in Africa. And I'll say that I started the Vitendo for Africa, that was in 2009, purposely to be able to connect the African community here in St. Louis, to connect them with different resources. And then a few years later, I was a co-founder of Africa Chamber of Commerce for the same thing, to be able to build African professionals here in St. Louis and businesses, connecting them also with business and trade in Africa. I'll say the African Chamber of Commerce is a St. Louis-based nonprofit corporation that was founded in 2017 with the purpose to develop African professionals and business owners in St. Louis area. The mission of the African Chamber of Commerce is to build network African professional business owners and engage in business throughout the African continent for the economic development of the St. Louis region. As I share, will be able to see that Africa plays a very important role in the St. Louis economic and political and culture. Just a few statistics about African community. According to the Immigration Policy Institute, more than 2 million immigrants from Sub-Saharan Africa lived in the United States in 2018. Survey shows that in 2016, African immigrants comprises of 10% of Black community in US. And between 2010 and 2018, the Sub-Saharan African population increased by 52%, significantly outspacing the 12% of growth in the overall foreign-born population in the same period. Many immigrants choose St. Louis for many reasons, including the affordable living expenses, friendly environment for startups, abundance of great restaurants, and pockets of diverse community. St. Louis is a home St. Louis is home to many first and second generation Kenyans, Ethiopians, Ghanaian, Liberian, Nigerian, Somali, and many nationalities. They are prominent academicians, medical professionals, religious leaders, and entrepreneurs. On trade and business, Africa is an important investment destination for some of the city's top industrial and Fortune 500 companies, contributing to the area economic health and employment. Some of the corporations benefiting from Africa includes Anheuser-Busch, Cargill, Bunge, Emerson, Danford Plant Center, and many others. Many major agricultural and healthcare biotechnology companies like Bayer, Pfizer are doing great business in Africa. Boeing aircrafts represent approximately 70% of commercial airplane markets currently in service across the continent of Africa. World Trade Center, like Judd said, Sister City program, which includes St. Louis and Senegal, helps connect the locals with international business contacts. African immigrants on entrepreneurship. African immigrant scholars and entrepreneurs are making great economic impacts in St. Louis region. A few examples I'll say is Mr. Ola Ayeni, President and CEO of Claim Academy, founded Premier Developer Bootcamp that's offering programs in software engineering and cybersecurity in St. Louis. Arinola Solanki, founder and executive director of My Events Coordinator, Party Rental, runs a full service and event management company in St. Louis. Others include Oliver and Betty Chibwe. They operate restaurants and they supply African food in Schnucks Market in the region. On corporate leadership, I would say many prominent leaders in St. Louis have personal ties in Africa. This includes Dr. Yemi Akande, President and CEO of Focus St. Louis, Amadou Yatsase, President of Blue Cross Blue Shield, Missouri, Judge Charlie, native of Sierra Leone, is Chief Magistrate, Judge of Eastern District of Missouri. On health, during pandemic, African immigrants have been at the forefront, providing exceptional services as essential workers. These are doctors, nurses, truck drivers, and police. A good example would say Dr. Mati Yatraya from Zimbabwe is a division of infectious disease at Washington University. She also serves in the board of city board of health.
Jeffrey, I should have reached out to you and had you help me write that op-ed. That's remarkable how many key industries and universities that African diaspora are in charge of. It's really incredible. And I think that if Americans recognize how many of our leadership have African descent, first and second generation, I think it would sort of change the way we talk about the continent. And one of those, key industries, if we want to call it, is actually politics. We are seeing more and more first and second generation Africans in national legislatures, in the United States House of Representatives. And so what we wanted to show is just a quick video from the first Liberian American ever elected to the Denver State Assembly, Naketa Ricks. This is from our interactive. So we're going to cue that up. It's really very timely because she talks also about the challenges of COVID-19 for her community.
As a Liberian American, I think that it's important that the voices that are represented at the state capitol reflect these immigrants that are in our community. I come from a city of Aurora, Colorado, where 22 to 23% of the people are from other countries. So we have a high immigrant population, foreign born. The immigrant community here is very vibrant. They are very engaged in small businesses and micro businesses. Those businesses have been hit very, very hard with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. They did not receive the PPP loans. They did not receive the economic disaster loans. And so with the state grants that have come up, the African Chamber has played a big role in trying to get that information to our businesses. But what's important about that community is that they typically are disenfranchised due to cultural differences, religious beliefs, and we need trusted voices to get the messaging around these grants and opportunities to the businesses before they apply. So we've been making recommendations, and in this role that I'm sitting in, I feel that I can make recommendations at the state level as to how to reach these small businesses. So the role that I see myself playing as an immigrant, I understand our community, I understand the heartaches, the barriers and the things that stop small businesses from functioning, and it's important for me to speak up and carry their voices to the table. Immigrants contribute so much to this society, whether we're doctors or lawyers, whether we're small business owners or taxi cab drivers, whatever it is that we do, we're hardworking people, and we need to be able to obtain our American dream. I'm also excited at the fact that, we may now be able to weigh in on foreign policy, that maybe there's going to be more attention to Africa. Africa plays an important role when it comes to the world economy, and it's important that we as people in the diaspora are able to help to move the agenda of Africa forward. So to the extent that we can encourage trade and investment, to the extent that we can encourage people from the diaspora to go back to Africa and invest through different groups, such as the African Development Diaspora Institute that I'm involved in. And I think those are very important groups, bringing people together and talking about Africa and keeping Africa in the forefront of our minds. So I'm excited to be at the table at the Colorado State Capitol, and I look forward to doing great work to improve the plight of immigrants. And I'm so excited for this great country because that's what makes America great: democracy and being able to talk to your peers and to people in your community and letting them hear you and being able to vote.
So what we wanted to do today is to showcase someone who can talk about business, someone who could talk about culture, someone who can talk about politics. And now we're going to bring it all together to hear what the U.S. government is doing. Before I turn to Elizabeth, if you have questions, please go to our event page at csis.org, and then we'll turn them to the panel. But Elizabeth, as you listen to Nora and Jeffrey and Representative Ricks talk about how they communicate Africa's importance at a city level, what do you think U.S. government officials and diplomats should be doing? How do we engage better outside the Beltway? What are the creative initiatives or engagements we can leverage to showcase Africa's growing importance to the United States? And I'd love to hear, as acting principal deputy assistant secretary, where are we going to go with this new administration?
Thanks so much, Judd. I'm really delighted to be here, especially with Jeffrey and Nora, because you're right. It takes the whole set of tools at our disposal, not only what the US government can do, what states can do, what the business community can do, big companies, small companies, academia. And I think we have a unique opportunity. Africa matters to US cities because Africa matters to the world. And I want to actually start just for a second with a few statistics. Nora sort of gave us the picture of the African demographics today. I want to take that into the future just a little bit. By 2050, it is projected that Africa's population will more than double to 2 billion people, slightly over. 70% of those people in 2050 will be under the age of 30. So in other words, Africa will be 2/3 of the net increase of the world's population by 2050. That is an immense global force by any calculations. And I think it's our responsibility to ensure that those young people have the opportunity for education, so that they can participate in a 21st century economy and be connected to opportunities globally, but especially in the United States. We've heard so much about the ties between Africa and the US, and I think connecting this, we call it a youth tsunami oftentimes, connecting this youth tsunami with the opportunities in the US will be tremendously valuable for Americans and for our cities. The Biden administration is already reaching out to African leaders and African citizens. Over the weekend, President Biden shared a video message on the occasion of the African Union Summit. And what's really important about that is that he didn't just make a speech to the leaders of the African Union, he shared a message of partnership and renewal with citizens across Africa. We think about 120 million people, many of them these young people in that demographic I talked about earlier, had a chance to hear directly from the United States president in the early days of his presidency. And I think it resonated not only across Africa, but we saw comments from US Congress, from the business community in the United States, talking about what that message of hope and renewal meant. It's clear to me that African companies and American companies are natural partners. African companies bring growth. They bring a youth demographic, a culture of entrepreneurship. United States companies represent the world's largest capital markets. They represent diversity, inclusion, transparency, labor rights, and transparent business practices. So it's too early in the administration for me to be making a policy pronouncement, but I think you're going to see an emphasis on greater connections between the United States and Africa and ensuring that US companies see the opportunities available to them in African markets. One of the most important ways in my mind that the government facilitates these connections is through exchange programs. And so I want to spend just a minute talking with you and the audience about the ways in which I think we'll look to fine-tune and expand programs that are already going very well to ensure that their impact is felt broadly throughout the United States. The first program that I want to talk about is the Young African Leaders Initiative. We refer to it affectionately as YALI by its acronym. This program is celebrating its 10th anniversary in 2020, and I want to just give your audience a sense of the size and scope of the program. There's 700,000 young Africans who are members of the YALI network. These are young people in Africa who stuck up their hand and said, I want to partner with the United States. And there are a whole variety of ways that we engage with them and engage them in the private sector in their own country. And then there are 24,000, slightly more than 24,000 alumni of the Mandela Washington Fellowship. This is a subset of the YALI program that brings the most talented African leaders to the United States for programming during the summer. And there are 3 tracks of that programming in the, I'm going to use the acronym MWF, the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program: civic engagement, public management, and business and entrepreneurship. These are obviously topics that matter hugely to Americans and to our American cities. And the alumni of the MWF program are government ministers. There are 4 current sitting ministers right now in African countries who are alumni of the program, CEOs, prominent researchers. We even have a Nobel Peace Prize nominee who has been an MWF fellow. So these are really super talented young leaders. They live in the United States during their fellowship, and they really, in my mind, learn and embody American values during their time. A statistic to back that up: between 2016 and 2019, the Mandela Washington Fellows contributed more than 39,000 hours of community service to American organizations. That is just a stunning statistic, and I think shows the impact of these programs on a very local level. It's not also just what they do while they're here. 75% of them return home with a specific plan to collaborate with an American business or an American university or an American community organization. And 44% of our MWF fellows own a business. So this concrete plan for collaboration represents a huge opportunity for American companies in a diverse African marketplace. They can really collaborate with our MWF fellows and build value for the US company and the African company as a result of the MWF and the YALI program. Since 2014, 42 states plus the District of Columbia have hosted fellowship activities, and I really do hope we can get that to all 50 as we move forward through the Biden-Harris administration. The value of the program to the partner institutions and to the states that host them is clear. 80% of the institute partners report that the Mandela Washington Fellowship helped them either create or strengthen their relationships with private sector companies in their own city. This to me is remarkable. We have young Africans coming and actually creating connections between institutions and business leaders in a city. Those two factors were both in place. The catalyst was the young African leader. And the YALI program also offers reciprocal exchanges for Americans. Since 2015, American YALI reciprocal exchange participants have traveled to 41 countries in Africa. 40% of those are making their first trip to Africa as part of a reciprocal exchange. And more than 150 of those participants have reported access to new markets because of a reciprocal exchange. Again, an exchange program providing a direct benefit to the citizens of a city in the United States. I'll just finish up briefly by telling you, in addition to the YALI and MWF programs, the International Visitor Leadership Program brings over 5,000 visitors annually to the United States. They participate in multi-week professional exchange programs. In 2019, 700 IVLP, we love our acronyms, International Visitor Leadership Program, participants came from Africa. They visited communities in over 30 states. And overall, the IVLP program has 86 American nonprofit partners in all 50 states. So hugely diverse, touches every state and many, many communities. And these exchanges cover topics ranging from entrepreneurship to good governance, to journalism, to countering infectious disease, a topic near and dear to all of us at the moment. I want to just close by giving you a couple of specific examples from the 2019 program. Mining companies in Colorado and Montana shared best practices for sustainable extractive industries with government officials and private sector leaders from Gabon and Tanzania. South African urban planners visited Baltimore, Kansas City, Phoenix, and New Orleans to explore ways to revitalize South Africa's cities and to dismantle the infrastructural legacy of apartheid in South Africa. And this last example is so timely. In November of 2019, literally months before the COVID pandemic began, 23 public health leaders, doctors, and government officials from across sub-Saharan Africa visited Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Minnesota to share best practices in combating infectious disease outbreaks. And the relationships formed on that visit are continuing to impact positively those countries' responses to COVID-19. So I'm going to finish where I started. Africa matters to the world, and that's why it matters to U.S. cities. I'm heartened, Judd, that you as CSIS are able to bring together all of these various parts of the community so that we can do our best to ensure that the government is continuing to support the activities that will benefit Americans across the United States. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I love these exchange programs, not only for the diversity of the topics and where they are going, but all of these secondary benefits that you talk about, you know, with the YALI students, for example. I wrote a paper with my colleague Aubrey Hruby from Atlantic Council that African students in 2019 brought $1.7 billion to the economies, right? In terms of buying stuff at IKEA and getting Apple computers. And so there's nothing that we can talk about in sense of a vertical of being just one thing. It all has all these benefits. But as I think about the comments that you made, Elizabeth, I want to bring in this question from Hunter Graff, who is at Wits University. He's actually from the Center for the Study of the United States, which we're doing an event with on Friday. And I think he gets really at this question of exchange. So it's happening at the institutional level. It's happening at the person-to-person level. But his question is, how do we popularize it? How do we normalize it? How do we make sure that Americans are familiar with what's happening? I mean, events like these help, perhaps. But let's start with Nora. You know, how do we make sure that this message is getting to a broader set of Americans, and particularly thinking about some of the cultural benefits of these exchanges?
Thanks, Judd. This is a very broad question, but I'll attempt to speak from my own personal experience. But we live in a fast evolving world. We live in an exponential world, and I think that one of the things we need to critically ask ourselves is, why would the average American want to know about African cultures and cultural exports from the continent? So we have to be very clear about what's the end game and what are we seeking to achieve here. Speaking about, so it needs to be very targeted. I believe there needs to be a very targeted approach with a very clear end game, an end target in mind. If I speak at a personal level of myself, when did I first interact with America, with the USA? It was through education. As I studied in my formative years, from the time I was the age of 10 to the point at which I was 16, 17, our geography curriculum had Europe, it had the US. So it did give us an appreciation as to what America is, a little bit about the culture, a little bit about the economics. And I think that this is one of the things that that may be considered, an approach in which we build this into the educational curriculum of the schools in the US. The other way in which I personally have interacted with America is through media. And I don't know how this would work out, but I think media still does play, whether we're looking at conventional media or whether we're traditional media, or even whether we're looking at now the fast evolving digital or social media, there's opportunities for us to scale up what it is that we are, or who it is that we are from the continent of Africa. Like we earlier said, and Jeffrey gave some stunning statistics, Elizabeth has given some stunning statistics about the contribution that Africa makes to the world and the contribution that the rest of the world or the US makes into Africa. And I think these are all worth scaling up in terms of getting people to understand. But again, at the end of the day, we need to have a very clear end game. If I'm an average American, why do I want to know about Africa? If I want to know about Africa, surely there needs to be a place where I can get more knowledge about Africa. And I guess it's providing that platform of knowledge.
That's an incredibly useful intervention. Thank you, Nora. And maybe we're going to go to Jeffrey, but maybe I'll put Elizabeth and I'll try myself to get to an answer on the end game. But Jeffrey, to answer the question about how do we normalize, familiarize, how do we elevate this conversation? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I agree with what my previous speaker just said. But also to add on that is that I think we have to be intentional in a way that we learn this information. One thing I'll say is that you will be able to start with just a little interaction with the people that you meet with. Who is your neighbor? Where do they come from? What information do they share? One thing I'll say for us also, what we've done also in St. Louis, we have St. Louis Mosaic Project that has actually helped share the information about Africa, immigrants in general, but also us as Africa Chamber of Commerce and Initiative for Africa. We've also reached out to the local community. Right now, on February 19, we're having a conversation about Black History Month with the Links Incorporated, Delta Sorority group of women. Just connecting with them and helping them answer. People, they can ask questions. What are these misconception people have about Africa? How can we be able to answer those questions? Magic House is a great place also that they do a traveler gallery. And Kenya Exhibit was one of the biggest success events they did actually 2 years ago, and they did again last year, and now has been going across the country, different museums. We want to be able to find a way that every community, like now we have a Festival of Nations, we have African Film Festival. How do we reach out to this community, know what's happening in a way that now you can not only know what's around St. Louis, but also what's happening outside St. Louis, what is happening outside the US. Open up your mind and be able to be broad enough to learn just outside what is happening outside US.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So Elizabeth, what's the end game, as Nora asked? What are we trying to achieve with these conversations?
Well, that is a great question. I want to pick up for a second before I try to answer your $64 million question. I want to pick up on the educational point for a second, because I think that is critical. I will speak here from my own experience for a second. My youngest son, who's a senior in high school, is taking an African American Studies course this year. I was struck by two things. One, that this is the first year in the state of Virginia that there has been a curriculum, a state-approved curriculum for that course of study for Virginia high schools, which seems stunning that that was a 2020 addition to the curriculum, that it's taken until then. But what I've loved about that course is almost all of the first semester was devoted to the study of Africa, and now the second semester to the study of the African American experience. And so I do think there's a real educational component here. And of course, that's something that's going to happen on the community level, on the state level. So it's a perfect tie-in. I guess my other point would be that I think I often contrast the way in government relations in Africa that I think the US government has a real responsibility to lead the way, to create the path for connections, for academic connections, business connections, community connections. Whereas I think often when I look at, for instance, Europe, for an example, it's the other way around. It's the academic, people-to-people business connections are leading the way and the government is supporting and coming along behind. And so I think the end game here is twofold. One, that we need to make sure that every time we have an opportunity and any time we have an exchange visitor or an academician or a researcher or a business leader from Africa, that we are giving them the platform, because the government has that opportunity, to make sure they're reaching into communities, not just on the coasts, but really so that all Americans and all American cities have a chance to have that kind of engagement. Because it is, as Jeffrey mentioned, right, it's figuring out who your neighbors are, who the visitors are, and sharing culture. I also think the business community is doing a great job here. I look at a company, I'm going to use an example like Peloton. They're currently celebrating Black History Month and have released a line of workout gear that has art from African artists living in the United States decorating the workout gear. And I have seen, just anecdotally, people in communities who I think would never have had any awareness of the way where to go purchase something that was a piece of African art, that now see that as something very accessible. So I feel like this is a place where the US government has a huge responsibility to create the connections and make sure the path is clear. And then we need to let our business community, our academic community, do what they do best, which is bring American innovation to Africa, draw African innovation to the United States, and create those connections. I hope that's what you're looking for. The end game is a tough question, Jed.
I don't know, Nora, did that satisfy you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You passed, Elizabeth. You know, I started this conversation off with a quote from Tony Blinken, and maybe I'll end it with one of my favorite quotes all the way back in 1959 from John F. Kennedy. He wasn't even president yet. He was still senator. And for those of you who don't know, Senator Kennedy, President Kennedy, actually spent a lot of his time focused on Africa. And in this quote, he said, "The world is now in Africa, and Africa is an integral part of the world community." And I think my end game is to show Americans that, to show and help Americans understand why we Americans benefit, when Africa is peaceful and prosperous. And it's not an argument about counterterrorism, and it's not an argument about, China. It's a look around you and recognize that Africa is in the pews, in your place of worship, that Africa is in your earbuds, in the cinema houses or streaming, in your state house, as we saw from Representative Ricks, and in the marketplace, as I think Coca-Cola and you, Nora, so brilliantly exemplify. And I think if we get to that point, then the focus on Africa will elevate in our national security apparatus and priorities. And we'll see that what we're doing is really, I think, addressing what Secretary of State Blinken said. So this is a big priority for us at CSIS. It's been our focus all year. We'll continue to do more work on that. I urge our audience to check out the interactive. It's got so many cool things in it. Trade relations, a great video from Prime Minister Tafa Balewa of Nigeria's visit to the United States, and many more. And we hope to have this conversation with you in the future. Thanks so much, Nora and Elizabeth and Jeffrey, for joining us. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.